What's up, party people?
Yo, yo, yo.
This is your host, Dinda. If you're actually watching this on YouTube, you can see that there are no guys on the couch because we're switching things up a bit to make it fresh. So yeah, and I'm here today with Phoebe. She's my friend that I actually met. Dude, I can't even remember.
We met in 2010.
Oh,
We've
really?
we've only met like twice before.
Yeah, before this year.
Yeah, before this
Twice.
year.
Oh,
I think.
yeah. But it's definitely less than 5 times.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I used to visit Perth, and we got actually reconnected here again. No, we got reconnected from Insta a few years back.
Did we?
I think
so.
no, as in like we know that both of us actually still exist.
Yeah,
From
it's like we
Insta.
followed each other.
Yeah,
on
we followed each
Instagram.
other.
Yeah, for sure.
But we actually kind of became friends as an
Yeah.
adult just this year.
Yeah, I think we just like became proper connected. Oh no, got a phone call. Sorry. I have
All
to take
good.
this one.
Yeah.
Yo, what's up, party people? Just a quick announcement while Phoebe takes her phone call. We have just added an anonymous form to our link tree, so you can find this in our bio. The form is for all you shy listeners. We would love to hear your feedback, stories, topic suggestions, thoughts, questions, anything and everything. And the best part is, we won't know who you are. That's kind of the point, right? So, with that being said, that's all I have to say. So now back to Dinda and Phoebe.
So I guess yeah, Phoebes, introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah. Hey guys. I'm Phoebe. And yeah, no, it's a privilege to be on Fresh Goods. I've only listened to I have to be honest, maybe 3 podcasts, but they've all been really fresh. I guess for occupation, I'm a speechy. So a speech pathologist. I've been doing that for 5 years, but this year I had a baby, so I'm on mat leave.
Yeah.
And then other things about me, I'm Indonesian, but I was born in Australia.
Raised in.
Yeah, born and raised here. Probably can tell from my accent. But my parents basically moved here because my dad got called to be a pastor of a church.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm a pastor's kid. That's another thing. Don't know what else to say. Used to lead youth. I was just saying that I stopped doing that end of 2020. That was when my season ended. And yeah, that's about it from me.
That's cool. Yeah, I think, yeah, just for me, I personally want to bring you into this podcast because I really think from the conversations that we had, there's something in it, and I just love how we can just be vulnerable. I don't know why with you it comes so easily, and it's somehow even though we were born and raised in different parts of, but it's just. Yeah, I don't know. It's just so easy to feel connected, and I always feel encouraged by you every time. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think it's because perhaps a lot of the wavelengths already aligned for us. So things like I understand your culture, kind of. Not completely, but then we already had some ground that we knew of each other, mutual friends, I suppose. You knew my cousin.
Yeah.
And then I know your siblings. Yeah. But it kind of opened space into being more vulnerable. Yeah. I think. And every conversation we've had, it'll be hours of talking, and I feel like we can continue on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've been really encouraging for me too.
Oh. Sweet. Sorry, I'm awkward right now. But yeah, sometimes I get awkward, guys, even though I'm loud. That's a bit part about me. But yeah, I think today we want to really talk about identity. It's funny because in the last episode, I actually kind of mentioned it, but I didn't really think I already planned that we want to talk about identity before the app that we did in friendship. If you haven't watched it, please do. And say, we miss Jara. Because yeah, he's been sitting out for the second app now. So yeah, he needs some love, guys.
Some annual leave.
Yeah. No, he's not annual. Anyway, so we thought that it's going to be a good topic, even though it's broad. When we talk about identity, it's actually so broad. But I think it's still important to at least just start with something and yeah, what do you think, Phoebes? Like, why do you think that it's actually, I think you mentioned a bit about like why you also thought about it, even though we haven't really discussed about like, what are the things that like you really want to talk about? But she also did mention about identity. So
yeah, I don't know, because you asked like, oh, if we ever did like a podcast, what we talk about, and I just thought about identity.
Yeah,
I think because I did struggle with it, like growing up.
Yeah,
and I think it's such a huge topic. Maybe it's an unsaid topic in like when you're a youth, particularly, because there's this pressure in high school to be something, to become something, and also like within the church, like there's labels that people put on you too. So there's this kind of tension within church, with every sphere of your life, in school, try to be cool or whatever, whatever the pressure is, and then at church. For me personally, like I struggled with identity just like culturally, like not feeling that I was like Indo enough in my Indonesian church, and then not being like white or Australian enough in my school, and also being a minority, and then feeling like I had to conform to a particular culture. That was interesting. But then also in the church, as a pastor's kid, I put a lot of like pressures on myself, and so I had this kind of weird identity struggle where I like, oh yeah, God's there, but I didn't seek my identity from him. Like subconsciously I was just looking everywhere else for a label to define myself and to find my purpose through those labels. So I find that in our conversations we often bring up identity without saying it. Like, not like, oh, I have an identity crisis. No, but like we talk about certain things. Like recently when I met you, like I just had a baby. And that was me shifting into maybe a new identity or maybe a new role. Like, oh, I'm a mum now. And all the negative connotations that I thought about it too. Like I had to battle with that. And, I shared that with you. And then you coming here again, and you shared things like, oh, I'm a student again. And that's like a wild thing, because you're not like going through the typical patterns of becoming a student, like from high school to be a student. But you're like, okay, I studied and went back, but now I'm going to study again. So there's like this new label you are reattaining. So I think we just end up talking about it a lot. So that's why we kind of thought of it. I think it was a natural.
And I think a lot of things that when I even like talk to my, not even just Christian friends, but non-Christian friends, we all kind of like have that struggle of like seeing ourselves from different lens and different seasons. But the question is like sometimes like, do you really have to find ourselves? You know what I mean? So I think we can first start with, how did you like what was your like biggest struggle of finding your identity, like as in like the label that you feel like have been put on you for the longest time? Like maybe you can want to share about that.
Okay, I'm just going to go straight to the pastor's kid one, because that's a really easy one, but it was a huge one for me. Because I think everything kind of streamed from that. So, my dad, like I mentioned, moved here because he was called to be a pastor. So, like, that's the first label that I kind of knew was put on me that wasn't my parents. It was more like other people. So, in like Indo churches, there's the cultural layer, and then there's a Christian layer, and sometimes they're blurred. So I think maybe in Asian or Eastern culture, like they expect you to meet a certain standard a bit more than maybe Western, because in Western culture it's like, oh, you kind of more individual, more an individualist, you become who you are. But so for me, I felt like I had to conform to their views of being a PK. So that's like one of the things I struggled with the most. And with that, I hated the label. So I hated it so much up until I was 14. So like for the first 14 years of my life, I mean, I'm not going to pretend or be dramatic that I was struggling with it when I was 5. Like 5, I don't know anything. But maybe around like, 8, 9, 10, when I started to see like in kids' church, I used to get pulled up a lot for being like naughty. And then they would say, oh, you can't do that because you're a pastor's kid. They would say it in there, like...
They actually use that pastor's kid.
Ko kayak gitu.
Okay.
So that means like if you're a pastor's kid, why are you doing that?
I was about to translate that.
I would translate so it was like, you can't do that because you're a pastor's kid. And so I kept hearing that. And I was like, what? Why can't I do it? I'm just normal. Like, I don't want to be a pastor's kid. And I felt bad too, because my parents would be like, Phoebe, like, you need to realize, like, you can't choose this. Like, this is something that is upon you. It's a weighty label, but it also will reflect on your parents. So then I felt like I'm carrying my parents' name for one, and I had to like perform. So because of that, I started getting into this thing where I'm like, I'm not good enough to meet this certain standard, and I wanted to rebel. And a lot of things at the time too, like being that perfect kid meant that, you know, you had to like know your verses, or you needed to, I don't even know what to say about this, but just like almost like a legalist view that's put on you when you're so young. Yeah. So
while you actually don't know what's going on.
I don't know what's going on. I actually questioned Christianity quite a bit. So I was like, why are these people so hypocritical? They talk about love, but then they're judging me. But also they don't do this to all the other kids that are also playing up, for example. Like if I did something as similar as someone else, the burden or the consequence is so much heavier. Bigger. Yeah. And I thought, man, that's really tough. At the time, I wanted to leave the church multiple times actually, because I wasn't a Christian then, or I didn't actually know Jesus. I knew it all in my head, don't get me wrong. Like you'd ask me like, oh, what's this Bible, story, or what's the lesson this? I'd be like, boom, 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 I know it all. But, it didn't transform me. I think that's why I struggled with it. And I think it shaped me to become, what's the word, like irritated perhaps? Even agitated. Really triggered by it. And it's funny because you don't like the label, but because you hear it so much, it then becomes something that you're so focused on. And because I was so focused on it, it seeped into other things like anxiety, for example, or I started to try to fit in to different areas. So I don't know if that kind of that's probably like the first label that I struggled with the most. And then I sort of made peace with it when I knew who Jesus was. Like, from the moment that it like hit my heart, I was like, oh, the label doesn't matter. Like, yes, being a pastor kid, there is a weight to it. But it's something that has like, it's a double side. Like one side, you can be really prideful of it. Like a pastor's kid, you do get treated like, you get some perks, you know. For example, you might get taken out to eat, or like sometimes you get money.
Oh, really?
Like on like
ang pao.
Like Chinese New Year.
Interesting.
Like or what I found interesting was that people would treat me like differently because I was pastor kid, but in like a nice sense. So there's like the perks of it, but there's also the downsides to it as well. But anyway, a profound quote that I was talking to you about that Natalie Ronian talks about is that pastor's kid is not who you are, but it's a training ground for where you're going. And I was like, oh, that's so good, that's because it's not actually you.
Nah.
And if you're a pastor's kid and you're listening to this, like that label is just a label, but it's not who you are. And it's definitely a training ground and an opportunity to be refined. You get front row seats to the struggles of a church, and you know that the church is not perfect, and you also get to see like God's grace in there as well. And you get to see how hard your parents, I think, pour out for the church community. And the amount of heart that goes into ministry. And I think because when I started to see those sides of it, like God really spoke to my heart, like, hey, like these people matter. Like these people are my image bearers. And like you need to reflect the same kind of love that your parents have. So that's when I started getting to youth ministry, and I kind of made peace with the label.
That's so good. And I think you also mentioned about like the cultural, you know, identity struggle when you're actually like Indonesian, but you were born and raised here. And I think a lot of people, not just Indonesians who are born and raised here, basically like Asians who are born and raised here, probably have that similar struggle. Would you want to like share about that and how like, probably just share about that first. And then we'll go from there.
I think, like Jara, and I think most of you guys at this church probably understand what that's like. And that's why subtle Asian traits exists, and was like, it popped off because everyone was like, oh my gosh, I get these subtle things that we don't talk about. So yeah, I think God also showed me something unique. When I started making peace with being a pastor's kid, I saw this tension between two cultures within my church. So to one hand, there were immigrants, like say you, that came here to study, found community in my dad's church because it's an Indonesian church. So they're like, oh, it's Indonesian community. Then there are other kids who are in that church, and then, you know, those couples ended up having kids and they become like me. You know, Aussie-born Indos. So there's like two groups within my church, and they didn't blend because they let the culture between them divide them. And so I saw that, and it used to irk me that they were like, it was almost like a clique. So it would be like the Indos and then the Aussie Indos, and they just wouldn't blend because they couldn't see past their so I had the opportunity, I suppose, to see that tension and to try and get to know the Indos. So I think around, it would have been 2013, 2014, I just felt like God telling me like, hey, actually get to know these Indonesian Indos, like Indos, like students, and get to know them. Because, you know, for so long, I put a label on them too that I didn't realize. Like I thought that they were, you know, different. Like I had almost this shame towards being Indonesian and having Asian heritage. Like I really wish that I didn't at some point. Which I'm really ashamed to say, but I did. Like I struggled with being Asian to some degree. I thought, oh man, it's so much easier if I was actually Australian. Like, because I feel that's who I am on the inside, but on the outside, I mean, I'm definitely yellow. You know, I'm definitely a banana. Like people get that. But then I didn't realize that having two cultures, you don't have to choose one. You're actually having both is actually a privilege.
It is.
And so coming out on the other side, I saw, oh, this is a special space to connect with both cultures. So then, at around 2013 and 14, I thought, okay, God, I'm going to try my best to get to know these people. And I did. You know, I started speaking Indo as much as I can. And your brother used to make fun of me. He used to call me Cinta Laura. You know Cinta Laura? So
no offense to Cinta Laura, by the way. She's big.
She's an Indonesian celebrity. So basically, just a big backstory. Cinta Laura, I found out after being called it so many times, is half German, hey?
She's
Indo.
a halfie.
So she's a halfie. And she got famous in Indonesia for speaking Indonesian terribly, like with a terrible accent.
At first.
Apparently now she's really good. But this was like way back then. So like 2008, 2009, like we used to get told that. And even when you visited, I think I was still getting called Cinta Laura. Like every church camp, we used to have like, you know those envelopes? Warm fuzzies? Like you'd write something and you put it in. So people would always graffiti on them. My mum would always say, crossed out my name, and it would be like Cinta Laura.
No, but you speak anyway, Indo well now. Like actually well.
Thank you. But that's like, you know, years. Like over 10 years. So I tried to speak the language more. Used to get made fun of anyway. But I started to see them through a different lens. Not the lens of their culture. So my struggle, I think I made peace with being like having this blended culture, or what I think the actual term is third culture kid. So third culture kid is a child who grew up in a culture different from the one in which his or her parents grew up in. So like I grew up with Indonesian values, I suppose, and cultural values, and Christian values, and sometimes it was hard to tell which one was cultural and which one was actual Christian. A good example is like my church. It's like very rude if you wear thongs. Like I don't know if that's here in Zion too, but like the way you dress is really important. And like you respect your elders. I think that's across the board in Eastern culture. But so having like these two spheres was really difficult. It's a tension, and when you're trying to fit in, you end up like trying to chase something that's not there. If that makes sense. Like you're a hamster on a wheel trying to attain a label or trying to get approval from one side, when in fact no one's seeing that you're struggling, but you're putting this pressure on yourself. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but basically that's the kind of experience I have in a nutshell in like, I don't know how long that was. 5
Yeah.
minutes.
No, that's so good. I think, yeah, I actually feel like a lot of people can relate to that, both the cultural and just, yeah, I mean, in your case, it's like being the pastor's kid has this like burden and just certain like label. And I think with a lot of people, like in my case, like I might not relate with like, yeah, like being the pastor's kid one, but I know like how it feels when you are like you already grew up in a Christian household since you're a kid, and you make all these like mistakes and all those things, and like I don't know, like there are times that I actually see myself from my mistakes, or like
Yes.
from the things that I feel like I just failed. I failed in that, and I feel like I'm a hypocrite, and I'm just starting to add all these labels into me, like, and internalize those, while that's not how we're supposed to see ourselves.
Yeah,
especially
100%.
nowadays with, you know, yeah, I think identity is so important, because you know how like nowadays you would see ads, I don't know if you have seen those, but like how branding is such a big thing on social media, right? Like it determines like how a brand is supposed to look like, sound like it's the direction. Like in an agency, it would be the basically the Bible of your for your like photographers, copywriters, designers, right? And a lot of like things that have been happening lately is like people actually make classes for like how do you brand yourself to become like a content creator, or like just like who you are in your like own space. So I think that's an interesting like, you know, an interesting phenomenon. And like I think I remember one time you said like how, yeah, the thing with us, like where do Christians actually stand in this? And like remember you mentioned something about where it's very countercultural, because like in the world that actually tell you you need to find your true self.
Yes.
We're actually, yeah, do you want to elaborate on that,
Yeah,
please?
sure.
Yes.
So, I think in our culture today, it's all about finding your true self. But I did write something out here. But so culture today may try to convey that you need to create your own identity and rely on self-confidence to carry you through life. But the truth is, we're all designed to be fully dependent on God and to look to Him for your confidence, purpose, and identity. And that's countercultural, because over here it's about going inside to yourself, finding your true self, and becoming your truest self. But it's not the correct way, I suppose, as Christians, because when you become your truest self, you could start to label things that's horizontal on the earth. That's when you look to the world to define who you are. But and I think I mentioned last time, like, sometimes identity or seeking your identity on this earth can kind of be like idolatry. You know, when you put something that's ultimate when it shouldn't be ultimate, and then that reshapes your own image of how you see yourself. Is that what you were referring to?
It is, because I think a lot of times it's very easy for like people to, sorry, I'm a bit distracted with what's going on right now. Jar's trying to fix the mic, guys. And then it's just like how, I don't know, for me, even like seeing LinkedIn and all that, a lot of stuff, like we do attach ourselves to position titles, the job that we do, even like when we introduce ourselves, or like when we actually have the small talk with people, like what do you do is always like, it would always be like one of the basic questions. And I feel like sometimes there's a certain pressure in that, like somehow it defines us subconsciously. When I talk to like friends who, you know, feel certain ways when we talk about like jobs and stuff like that, well, actually in God we don't have to be fixated, or you know what I mean, like we don't have to see ourselves the way the world sees us. And I think that's the struggle right now, when we don't have, sometimes like we don't achieve certain things, or we do struggle with certain things, like we're not actually these labels that we put on ourselves. And definitely. I think the next like question is like, was like, how did you actually realize to change that perspective from like all these labels that the world kind of put into you, like pastor's kid, Aussie born Indo? How did you actually overcome that yeah, that struggle, I guess, like to actually see yourself from the truth.
I think it was a journey for sure.
Yeah.
Like I didn't just like, I see myself now not as a pastor's
Yeah.
kid. I know I still am a pastor's kid even now. It's a little bit different actually now, because for 25 years I was part of that church, and I grew up and I made peace with the label, I suppose. And the label wasn't above God. At the time it was, because I hated it, but as much as I hated it, it was there, and then it became my focus, and then it started shaping who I was.
Yeah.
Which I would say I realized that it was something that I was fixated on when I became a Christian. So like around 14, I realized that this pressure I'm putting on myself is not from God.
Yeah.
And those labels, they're kind of like scales that slowly fall off. It's not like a straight away. Like I know you're a new creation in God. Yes, you are. But it's a daily struggle to remember, like, for me, I'd say because it took up such a long chunk of my life, it takes also time to relearn your new identity, to reshape your identity. Because if you're doing it for 25 years, it's not just a habit. The more you do it, becomes like your character, right? And because I believed in that character so much, it took me a while to realize, okay, I am redeemed, but what does that mean to be redeemed? It's meant to be like living from that state, as opposed to that state of like, I'm not enough, or bitterness, or anger, for example, or feeling like I don't belong, right? Which can actually seep into anxiety, comparison, things like that.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, I only realized when I started feeling irritated, started feeling anxious, like that's not of God, like God doesn't give you that kind of spirit. The fruits of the spirit, like love, joy, peace. I think that's when I realized I was stepping into more of my identity. It's through the fruits. Yeah. It's not just in my head when I tell myself like, I am joyful, but or like I'm at peace, or like I'm loving. Like yes, they're good things to think about, perhaps, but unless you do something or put it into action, it's not who you are, and it's an ongoing thing. Yeah. So I would say I wasn't living in the truth that I was like loved, fully known, forgiven even. Like I think another thing that your identity can be is your emotions and your sins. Oh yeah. So if you're dabbling in sin, right, then you'll feel guilt. You feel so guilty that it almost becomes your identity, because you feel like you are not worthy enough to see God. Yes, to some degree you did something wrong, right? But the thing is, if you really know God, like God says you are forgiven, and his forgiveness literally covers all your future sins, your past sins. Like nothing is so big. And do I sin to this day? Yes. So is identity an ongoing struggle? Yes. But I realized that I was moving into a new identity in God when I realized how my feelings were not in alignment to God. Yeah. I think that's how I would say. So when I became a Christian, and like that's, I can't do maths, but almost like 10 years. Yeah. Yeah.
And still ongoing.
Still ongoing.
So it's a journey, guys. And no, actually what you mentioned just now was so big. I think a lot of times emotions and sins are a big part of, sometimes I don't know why it's so easy for us to let these emotions win over the truth, like over what God actually says about us. And I admit that, like I actually like struggled a lot with like, giving power to the emotions or to the things that have happened in the past. Yeah. Either it's trauma, either it's just like what I've done or what have happened to me. Especially like for me, I struggled mostly with like what the closest people say about me. Yeah. When they were not even in the best state. It's not like their intention to hurt me, but it's just like when they were not in the best state and they said some hurtful things about me in a way like it's just somehow it became like a label, like a negative script that I have to unlearn. I have to unlearn that it is not who I am. Yeah. And who I am is actually based on the scripture, and the scripture, I can't even English right now, sorry.
No, perfect. Continue.
The scripture actually says a lot of things about us, you know, like you said, like forgiven, redeemed, like we're not abandoned, but we're actually, God is always with us and for us, and we're adopted. And yeah, I think a lot of times, because I don't know, some people like myself, when we're so used to with hearing all these things from Sunday school to youth to being an adult, it just doesn't seem to be anymore. Like there are times that, you know what I mean? Like it somehow we become numb. Well,
yeah, you familiarize yourself to it. You're desensitized. That's probably what it is. Yeah.
While they are actually the ones that can really give us that, I don't know, food. It's like spiritual food, like to actually remind us, like it's like shower. Like we actually need to be reminded and to actually believe. And if you actually have a struggle to believe, like you already, I know that, I know this, and I've been there and sometimes still struggle with that. I think the prayer that we should pray is actually for us to believe in that truth.
Yeah, like, you know God, help my unbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is that. That's a really, I think, noble, humbling prayer, because it's just honest to God. Like, you don't have to perform to God. You can just say it as it is. Like, he already knows. But yeah, true. I really like what you said, actually, about how you let other people dictate. I think that's probably what I wanted to get at when we were talking about Pastor's Kid, is that for 14 years at the start, I let other people dictate who I was without realizing that they were shaping my view on myself.
Yeah.
But I let them. So because I got so irritated by what people said, it made me focus on what they said as who I am.
Yeah.
But more so because it was like that, I wanted to do the opposite of what they said. And so when I put my focus on what other people said, that shaped me. Because I think whatever you focus on shapes you.
Yeah.
You know, like that's probably what idolatry is, when you focus on anything outside of what God says you are.
Yeah.
So focusing on like horizontal plane, if you think like world is like the horizontal plane and God's like this vertical connection that you have, it's all like focusing on this side. Like even growing up, like say in high school, I think that was the most intense time of trying to figure out who I was. Yeah. Because I really, really valued friendship. And I felt like I couldn't find a friend that understood me, because for so long at church, I thought people didn't understand me. So I built this label that, oh, people don't get me, you know? And so I tried to find that one person. I remember praying to God. I was like, God, please give me one person that I can connect with and have like deep conversations, you know, get me on every single wavelength. The thing is, yes, God answered that prayer, but that's like 10 years later. Like now I have friends like that. But back then I didn't. But I had to go through that struggle of trying to find out like who I was aside of what people said about me. Yeah. So I really cared like what my friends thought of me. I really cared about what my, you know, people at church thought of me. I started caring so much and let let those labels like dictate me, you know. So that's an interesting point, and I think it's really true.
Yeah. And I don't know, I think it's just when it comes to identity, there's so much things that we can say about it, because I feel like a lot of people, like, we can struggle, like have their own struggles in even different areas of our lives. It can be like from like a family point of view and work point of view, you know, like there's so much things we can say about it. But at the end of the day, I think we need to be reminded that it is, the gospel is like like God accepts us as who we are. Yeah. Yes, we are precious. We are unique in every single ways. Yeah. But we also can't forget the fact that we are sinners and we are more broken than we could imagine. And that's why God sends us like Jesus that we don't deserve to actually like, for us to not be where we are, but to actually always, like keep.
He doesn't leave us where we are, but helps transform us. Hey, no, that's okay. I completely agree. Yeah.
And that's what actually transforms us. And I think that's the big part of the thing of identity, is like what we do, the decision makings that we make, our reactions are kind of depend on how we see ourselves. Yes. If we see like we have to perform, then we're always going to be like striving for that, going on the like hierarchy of like your job, whatever you're doing. Or if we see like yeah, if we actually see ourselves just based on performance, I feel like it's not a sustainable way to think about it. But if we actually think from a point where like, no, like we actually is already like enough as our own, like we don't have to like prove something to someone or the world, like it'll give us like less, I don't know, less burden, and to just actually operate from a sense of like God already loves us and God has a certain purpose for each one of us. And I think it's going to, it's a game changer. I feel like once you really 100%. Understand and see ourselves in God's point of view, we won't be as anxious as like we can be sometimes. And
I think that's the thing, like you're right, it's a game changer, because things like mental health and things that we struggle with, I think they're actual consequences of not really understanding your true identity in God. Perhaps. So if you are always trying to be enough, try to perform, you're going to chase things that will temporarily satisfy you, but they're not going to completely satisfy you. And I think one thing we should say as well, it's not wrong to like, value like your career and your occupation and like, your status, like your relationships and stuff, but you just can't make them your ultimate area of satisfaction. That like the ultimate place where you will be satisfied is discovering who you are in God, and then relearning that and then reliving that like every single day. And that's why I think it's a daily struggle. Because we are freaking forgetful people. Like I am so forgetful. And now that I'm a mom, I'm like, what? This mom brain is for real. Like I'm not even kidding. But like you have to preach the gospel to to yourself every day, because you'll forget it every day. And we're just like the Israelites. Like nothing that we face is new. Like if you look in the Bible, you're like, oh, they struggled with that too. Like I struggle with that every day. And just because I've made peace with my label, say like a pastor's kid, doesn't mean I'm not struggling with some other, identity battle or tension in my season now. So I think, it's a daily struggle. But the thing is, like, God is so graceful and, like, merciful and forgiving. He's like, here's a second chance, and you get a second chance and 10 millionth chances because I've forgiven you. And I was like, that's super cool. Like, it's really a gift. And that's just the difference with Christianity. It's like nothing that you do to attain it. Like you're chosen, you're forgiven, you're redeemed, like you're loved, like you've got community, and it's not because of you. So it's different to everything in the world where it's like, oh, I need to attain. And maybe you'll get some kind of temporary satisfaction from that and be like, oh yes, this is who I am. But then you're like, I'm not that anymore. Because life changes, seasons change. But like God's like steady, stable thing that you can go back to, and it's really comforting. To me, it's just like a big warm hug, because like when I mess up, I can hear two voices, right? One voice is like that accuser. It's like, oh, dude, you messed up again. Like, for example, I don't know, you struggle with pornography, for example, you fell into pornography again. Oh, no, you're guilty. You said you wouldn't, you're a hypocrite. There's like accuser side of you. But the thing is, like, when you're a Christian, there's also this voice that if you know who you are in God, there's this advocate, and that's Holy Spirit, right? He's like, oh, yes, you fell into that, but I still have paid for that sin. And I still love you. You can get back up again. You can come back to me. And I think that's really encouraging, because that's the difference with knowing Jesus to not knowing him. Is that you're continuously transformed because you're continuously forgiven. And you're continuously brought out away from these like lies that are kind of like swarming around you. They're like, hey, listen to me. I think that's a good way to put it.
That's so good. So good. And I just, I was just thinking of like, because that is the last point that I really want to make, is like, it is always going to be a journey, right? And I think like right now, there are a lot of things as well that, I don't know, like maybe you can share and I can share also a little bit later. I feel like I haven't really shared much, but
you go.
Like I was just thinking of, even now, there are a lot of ways that we can remind ourselves. Of course, reading the Bible is always going to be the ultimate one, like, because it's the source of truth, right? But at the same time, like, there are other things where God can actually speaks to us in like his own personal ways. It can be music, and it can be like art. It can be like, I don't know. I was just thinking of like you always tell me how like God really speaks to you the most when you're in the car and like you're listening to the music.
Yeah.
Because I do that too. And like I actually have a playlist where like, you know what, I'm just gonna listen to these songs for now because I need to like rewatch like all these, like sometimes I just feel like I need a reset, right?
Yes.
And maybe you can share like in your daily, like where are you now with the identity struggle?
Where am I now?
And like how do you like what are the tools that maybe you can share to the audience that really help you with the battles?
Okay.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing new, like it's nothing like special.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times the tools that help you reset your identity are things you've heard if you grew up in a Christian home, like for a lifetime. It's like pray, Sabbath, so like take some time off to rest, you know? And rest is not like just go to sleep. I mean, sleep's important, but rest is just like don't get caught up on like just spending your time on social media, but actually just take time to like go for a walk, see God's nature, because everything does point to him in some ways. But also, definitely reading the Bible. Those are just like the main things. But when you get older, you realize they're hard things to keep, to sustain. So to read your Bible every day is a battle because your life gets busier. And when you're older, as an adult, you have more responsibilities. So if you've got a pizza, like your day's like a pizza, you got to cut them slices up, but you need to make sure there's a slice for God. You know? And do I read the Bible every day? Like I have to admit, no, but it's something that I do want to continuously try. And it's something you strive for. So for me, I think I'll go back to the first point that you asked, which was, what am I battling at the moment?
Yeah.
It's not so much an identity label, but I think it's an emotion. So like fear. So I think for me it's fear.
Yeah.
So I struggled with like fear of the future. I did, and I still am. I did struggle with that in the past, you know, but particularly when I was pregnant, I realized I had this narrative of what it would be like to be a parent. So, suddenly your freedom's gone. Like, yes, that's true to some degree, but I just had all these negative narratives of what being a mom would be like, you know? And yes, we planned for this child and everything, and God gifted us a child and it's awesome. But when I was pregnant, I had the first 3 months was me thinking, oh no, what if it's going to be so debilitating? What if it means that I'm going to change who I am? Because I realized this was a testing ground for me to find my identity again in Christ and not who I was before. So it was a good reflection time to realize how much I idolized my freedom, how much I idolized my season of singleness. Not singleness as in being single, but like having childless season. I just idolized my independence, my lifestyle and freedom more than serving God in the context of being a mom. So I had that first 3 months going, oh no, and then I'm the kind of person who would like to think of the worst case scenario and then often catastrophize without realizing that that's where my brain goes to. Yeah. And when I'm catastrophizing, I don't really include God in that. And that's when I was like, oh, like I'm letting this really dictate me. So there were moments that I felt really anxious. And I would be like, yes, I know God says don't worry, but I'm like, nah, I still want to worry. You know, like I still want to focus on being worried. So that was really debilitating for me. And it's something that I was struggling with because I didn't think God would be there. And then basically I was researching. So I'm the kind of person when I'm stressed out, I like to research things, you know, good old Google. But I made sure the Google was quite Christ-centered. So I'd be like, fear of motherhood, Christian view, you know, like make sure it's narrowed down. Yeah. And I came across Felicia Masonheimer. Do you know her?
I'm not sure.
She's just like this female theologian. And she quotes Francis Chan. I'm just going to read it because I think it really blessed me and hopefully it'll bless someone else. But I just felt like unprepared. I felt underqualified, mainly because I'm one of the few people that are married in my circles and most people are either just dating or still single. And I just felt like, man, there's going to be this gap that widens. And the thing that I also idolized above all else, I suppose, at that time was friendship. So I was really scared that my friendship would change and I would be that person that couldn't hang out with my friends. And I had to really like ask myself, why is that so important?
Yeah.
And why did I believe that that would be like, am I God? Do I know that my friendships will then suddenly change?
Yeah.
And thankfully they haven't, you know.
Yeah.
It was just all this catastrophizing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, Francis Chan, Felicia Manson-Heimer quotes is like, in his book Crazy Love, if you ever read it, it's a really good book, says that worry and stress are signs of arrogance because they're both the antithesis of trust in God. My worry over qualification is nothing more than me telling God, you don't know what you're doing, you picked the wrong person, the wrong time, the wrong skills, I can't do what you're asking of me. And when I read that, I was like, oh, if God like has given me this child, like, who am I to say that he won't equip me?
Yeah.
And so that's probably my most recent kind of struggle with labels. And when I was like kind of like planning, sort of prepping what I would say about this, I realized that that's actually an identity struggle without realizing it. It's because I didn't go back to the root of my identity, which is like, I'm equipped by God, you know, like he has got my whole life in the palm of his hands.
Yeah.
Who am I to say that he's not going to help me during that? And yeah, I did place friendships above God sometimes. I think it's sometimes hard not to do.
Yeah.
So your identity really molds you on what you focus on, and anything outside of God, you know, you'll feel restless, dissatisfied, disappointed, and you really will be chasing after these things like hamster on a wheel. I think at the crux of it is there's this really good verse that I mentioned to you.
Yeah.
Jeremiah 2:13. I'll have to read it because I can't remember it, but it explains it pretty well. So like we're really prone to seeking external validation to like determine our identity outside of God. So the verse is, for my people have committed two sins. They've forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, like the oasis, you know. But instead, they've hewed themselves out cisterns, broken cisterns. So cisterns are kind of like a jug or like a vessel.
Yeah.
But it's broken, that can't even hold water.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes the false labels you put on yourself. There'll be water in there temporarily, but then it'll seep out and it'll be empty again.
Yeah.
And you'll be like trying to seek out another thing where there's already this fountain, this oasis, like which is God, and that's going to sustain you through all seasons. So that's just, I guess, the first section of what I'm like struggled with recently. Yeah. We haven't even gone to the tools. Do we want to go into that?
Up to you, really. What's the time, Jara? What's that? 40
minutes.
40 minutes.
We're going to wrap up soon anyway.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think you should just like tell them, because I feel like that's something that I feel like
I'll tell you.
it will, like, maybe for some people they already know all these stuff. They already know all these verses and all that.
Nothing new.
But still something like I think sometimes like we have to be also like, I don't know, practical in our ways of like how can we actually help ourselves to actually be reminded and to actually, you know, because God's strategic, the enemy is also strategic, and we also have to be strategic in some ways in our spiritual battle.
Fight these battles.
And I think, something, if you want to share, go for it.
Yeah, I think you mentioned music. Yes, I felt like God has spoken to me through music.
Mm-hmm.
I know God speaks to everyone differently, but for me, it's music. It's the lyrics. It's sometimes I'm driving and like, for example, driving to work. So I work in Rockingham, which is like 45 minutes away. So I usually end up listening to music or podcasts. Just make sure like your music isn't just secular. Like secular music's great. I'm not hamming on them or anything, or like I love music in general. But when you've got like music that speaks about who God is, what you listen to also shapes you, you know? So like Who You Say I Am, I mentioned to you, like it's an old song, or what did you mention by Lauren Daigle?
Oh, You Say.
Yeah, You Say, like that's a really good song.
Yeah.
When you hear these things, it's a reset. You can use any time in your day. It's all the in-between moments that you can include God in. Like he's there with you all the time, but it's on us to include him into those moments.
Yeah.
So in the car listening to music, like really listening to those lyrics and like praying over them. I think that's one thing for me. You're listening to music that reflects God's heart.
Yeah.
Like Maverick City.
Yeah.
Really good one. Gyra.
Oh my gosh, in the last episode, we actually just do that.
No, it's a good song.
He's annoyed.
Well, if you actually search up Maverick City, the first song on their playlist, like when you play it, is actually Gyra. But like Hillsong, things like that. But not just Hillsong. But there are lots of godly kind of music that helps reset your identity just by listening to that and pulls you out of those emotions of anxiety or pride or like moments where you want to maybe feel lustful or all the things that are against the heart of God. That when you listen and you really listen, you don't just like passively listen. When you really listen to those words, it can transform you. And I believe God uses music because it's all across the Bible. Music is a really pivotal part of the Christian walk. David, used music a lot when he was celebrating. Music was out, tambourines were out. So music is really close to God's heart, and I think that's one way he speaks to us. Another thing I mentioned to you is journaling. Like, I'm not saying you have to journal, but gratitude journal anyway for me is one way that I reset my identity. So I used to journal every day, and I would do the 5-minute journal. I don't know if you guys have heard this. You'd write down 3 things that you're grateful for first thing in the morning. It doesn't have to be long, convoluted or anything. But why is that so to God's heart and helps you reset your identity? Because there's a verse in the Bible that says, give thanks in all circumstances. And so like when you're waking up, you often have like high cortisol levels. So you often can feel anxious. Right? But when you write down like, God, I'm just grateful to be alive and dwell on that, it's like, oh, I'm grateful for being created, And it does help. So that's another tool. And definitely resting. So in 2020, I read the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and I told you to read that book. Good book by John Mark Comer. He's a fantastic pastor from Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon, in America. And his book honestly changed my life. After the Bible. But I realized I was quite restless, like subconsciously really restless, because I was rushing and I was multitasking and I just wasn't taking time to Sabbath and like real slow down. And if you actually see Jesus, like he never rushed. He never hurried. And he was like the happiest man alive, because you don't hurry when you're happy, because you're like, life is so good. There's like, a little, like a little skip in your step. But when you're rushed, like a Martha, you don't end up being like Mary. You don't sit and dwell in his word. So I think Sabbath or just spending time in your week, even in your day, just to be with God. You don't even have to read the Bible, just be with him. And I think the most parallel thing to that's not Christian would be what is really the big craze, meditating. People meditate. Everyone wants something that's kind of like the kingdom without the king. That's what Mark Sayers always says. Like, we all want bits of this kind of peace or, spiritualizing things. But basically that's it. You just have to spend some time with God as well. They'll help reset you. A huge one, which you guys have, is community. Like when I spend time with you, I think the reason why we get on is because I get to see God's heart and how God's moving in your life, and you get to see how God's moving in my life in ways that I don't see. It's like we help each other's blind spots, because we all have blind spots. And honestly, it helps me see like, oh, God's hand is really in your life, in your story, in the way that, he's brought you here to this church as well, to meet like Gyra, to be on this podcast. Like, I just don't believe it's a coincidence. Like, community helps reflect God's heart. 100%. And then that helps, because you often pray for me, right? And you're like, you pray things into me, you speak life into me. And we try to be that kind of friend where we are intentional, but also not just intentional in our friendship, but also in like bringing God in, but it's like authentic. I don't know how to put it. But I think that's community. Like 2 or 3 gather in my name, like I'm with them. Like that's in the Bible. So community is huge. Like you got to make sure you're not doing it alone. Otherwise you'll lose your identity elsewhere. Like you are the average of the 5 closest people around you. Like make sure those people reflect God's heart. Yeah.
So good.
So that's it, I think.
That's it. I mean, wow. Like Phoebe's I didn't have to say that much. Just let
sorry,
you.
I talked so
No,
much.
but like I think there's just a lot of wisdom that
That's
I do receive from her, and I and I believe that a lot of you guys actually will receive a lot of wisdom from our conversations
Hopefully.
today.
God willing.
And yeah, I think with identity, there's just I really feel like a lot of times. Yeah, like when I struggled with it, I'm so thankful for community that really helped me. And just what like Phoebe said, I think it's very important to also surround yourself with the right people and to not be what you say that like to not normalize or to not be can't even speak right now, to not like just okay about like your habits when you are actually you feel like you're not in a good place in terms of spiritual walk, but to actually like be engaged with where you are and to I don't know, sometimes just take that extra step forward. Like what are the things that can help you, or who like find the people who you think can help you in that spiritual walk and in that identity, because being lost is not a great place to be. And maybe there can be another episode about being lost, but I feel like a lot of times when I felt lost, even though I went to church and all that, but there were times that I feel like I don't know who I am. I can't even recognize myself. Like that's SZA's new song, guys, check it out. Like no, but it's just like sometimes there are times that I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. But yeah, God always does his thing. Even when I just ask one question or pray 2 lines even, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be like, oh, big and all this like experience. You know what I mean? Sometimes like I feel like we romanticize all like the spiritual experiences that we have while God actually just wants you to show up. 3 words, just show up. And then God will reveal who he is to you. And I feel like the more we actually internalize who we are in God, life is so much better.
Yeah, you're going to operate from a place of peace and a place of love, like places that are reflective of God's heart, that are close to God's heart. But yeah, if you're struggling, I think, like we mentioned, we're all struggling to some degree with like truly living in God's identity. And just know, like, he sees that. He sees your struggle. And he sees beyond your labels, and he's calling you to come back. Every time you fail or you go the wrong way, he's still there. He's got his arms wide open, and that's really comforting. Yeah. You can just come back to him, and the community, and hopefully the community will embrace you. Yeah. And I believe they will. So should we end off with that verse that we talked about yesterday? Yeah. I think the verse is, Colossians 3:2-3. I think it's a classic actually, but set your mind on things that are above. So like things of God and not of things that are on earth. For you have died and your life is hidden in God. So if you want to find out where your life is, it's in God.
There you go, peeps. Thank you so much for today. What were you about to say?
Stay fresh.
That's it. Stay fresh. We'll see you later.